right, well, hey, what's going on, Merge? How you guys doing tonight? Are you sure? I really feel like you guys are dead tonight. Are you okay? We were like, guys, it was over 80 degrees today. The sun was shining. Be happy, be glad, it's good. Hey, it is really good to see you tonight. If I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, you're missing out. Just kidding. My name's Todd. I'm the pastor of student ministries here, and I would love to meet you. I'm glad that you're here. Spring breaks are happening, and so it's always hit or miss of who's going to be here during the spring break season. And so if you're on spring break right now, enjoy it. Couldn't have asked for a better week for spring break. All right? Hey, we're going to be kicking off a new series, all right, that we're calling the Old Testament Experience. And I'll get into that, why we're calling it this, and why we're going to spend several weeks in kind of the Old Testament. We'll get there in a minute. But before I do so, I want to kind of reiterate what Charles and Zoe were saying earlier, all right? Momentum Youth Conference, you guys have gone in the past, many of you. It kind of shifted gears this summer, and they're doing Momentum on the Road, all right? And we have the privilege of actually hosting one of those sites here at Grace Church Bath Campus. And so here's the deal. We also understand that that can be a little bit of a letdown. I'm disappointed. But we're working hard to try to make the most out of this experience. And so, as I think about Momentum Youth Conference, how many of you have gone? All right. How many of you would agree that it's one of the best weeks of your summer? That's what I'm talking about. You guys are alive. That's what I'm talking about, all right? As I think about Momentum Youth Conference, I think the sessions are great, the music's great, but I think what the goal of the week of Momentum Youth Conference is for you guys to be together for a week and spending time. It's the late night conversations. You guys are hanging out around campus and all of those things. And so I want to work hard. My team and I, we've worked hard to try to recreate a lot of what you would experience a week away at Momentum, trying to recreate that here. You are going to have to help me. You have to get over the hurdle that we're in our hometown. All right? That is going to be the biggest hurdle you're going to have to get over. But we are going to actually house you guys here at Montrose, which I'm excited about. We get to take over this place. It'll be fun. Yes, there's the sessions. Yes, there's good music. All of that will be great. But I really think just the chance for you guys to be together is going to be the goal of this 4-day experience. All right? And so it's going to be a blast. We don't want you to miss out on it. But here is the reality of what you need to understand about Momentum on the Road. Spots are super limited. Just because of how many seats we have at our Gent Road building, we have a block of tickets already reserved, and so we want you to kind of gain your spot right away. Once they fill up, they fill up. There's no way that I can get more tickets, and so it's a first come, first serve. So be sure to go home, start talking to mom and dad, and get the ball rolling. And we would love to see you Momentum on the Road. It'll be a good time. All right. So tonight, starting for the next handful of weeks, we're going to be having this conversation in what I'm calling the Old Testament experience, all right? Now, we spend a lot of time, obviously, here at Merge opening up the Bible. We open up God's Word. We want to learn more about who He is. But we spend a lot of our time in the New Testament. So the Bible's split into half. Old Testament, New Testament. And when we spend a lot of time in the New Testament, what we're doing is we're looking at the life of Jesus. We're talking about how He lived His life when He was here on earth. And Jesus ultimately sets the best example for you and I on how we should live our lives. Understanding what it means to follow Him, understanding the heartbeat of why we just celebrated Easter. Salvation is locked into what we just celebrated this past Sunday. And so as we think about Jesus, it's great. But God's story, God's plan is much greater. It's much bigger than just Jesus. And so I want us to take time and look and spend the next handful of weeks looking in the Old Testament so that we can start seeing kind of God's plan unfold, but also see how His sovereignty has showed up even from the very beginning. And so I'm excited about this. Each week we're going to look at a different character in the Old Testament and allow you to see kind of what they went through, how God met them in that moment. And my hope is, this is my prayer, that you would be able to put yourself into the shoes of one of these characters and see how God can meet you right where you're at in your life. All right? So let's jump in. Today we're going to be looking at a character by the name of Joseph. Joseph. I got the characters mixed up. I'm talking about Joseph, all right? And we're looking at Joseph, and it's the temptation experience, all right? And this is what we're going to be pressing into here a little bit today. And so here's my question. How many of you are scared of something? All right, it's okay, raise your hand, all right? that you are scared of something. I think all of us have some level of fear. I would say this, most of the men in this room would say to the very core that there is actually a fear of failure that kind of lives within each of the guys in this room, all right? That fear of failure is a real thing and kind of dwells within men specifically. But you could sit here and look, and we could probably pick apart every single person in this room and talk about your fears. Well, we're not going to do that, all right? But I would tell you some of mine. I am absolutely, deathly afraid of snakes, all right, straight up. If I see a snake, I get like the warm, like, tinglies up the back of my neck, and I start to freak out, like straight up. My team makes fun of me for it. And I remember the one year at Bible camp that we do for the younger kids here at Grace, they actually told me to like, hey, watch out for this box. Don't let any of the kids get this box. And I said, oh, okay, no worries. I'm thinking it's a box full of snacks, right? We don't want the kids to devour the snacks. No, it was like, I don't know what type of snake it was, but this giant like python-looking snake, just in a box right here next to me. I about freaked out. Monday, is my son's birthday, and we took him to the zoo, and my son absolutely loves snakes. And so we're walking through the reptile exhibit. My son is literally by himself with his buddies, and John was there, looking at all the snakes, and I'm on the other side of the room, just standing from a distance looking, right? The one snake is called a children's python. You know why? Because it eats kids, all right? It's terrifying. Snakes are horrible. Okay, enough about snakes, all right? All of us have fears, and we can understand that, all right? You know what kind of like makes you uncomfortable, what gets you to that place where you're like, I just can't do it anymore. I'll never forget when I was in high school, I had the chance, my buddy Joe and I went to go visit some friends that lived a couple hours north of us. And so we drove up there, junior, senior year, went up to go visit these guys. And we're just like, they're showing us their hometown, showing us around. They're like, hey, you know what we should go do? We should go cliff jumping into the creek. And I said, yeah, that sounds good, no big deal. And so we go and we see this cliff, and they call it Old Man's Cliff. Why? I don't know, but Old Man's Cliff. And so we approach this cliff, and our buddies are telling us, hey, so you're going to jump this cliff. It's probably about 50, 60-foot jump. I mean, it was no joke. Into this creek where they're like, hey, at the bottom, no one's ever touched the bottom. That's like the myth, right? It's like no one's ever was able to reach the bottom of this river, creek, whatever it is. And so they start to explain, they're like, all right, this is what we're going to do. You kind of have to get a running start, and so start back and then just start running, but make sure you really pivot and get a good jump, because you have to jump far enough to clear kind of the rock edge so that you hit the deep part of the water. I'm like, okay, sounds good. And then also, while you're running to get that like running start, watch out for all the tree roots that are kind of exposed, because if you trip, it's just not going to end well. I'm like, thanks, guys. So why do you do this? How is this fun to you? And they're like, Todd, why don't you go first? Of course, right? Yeah, let's pick on the little guy here. Yeah, you go first. And so I'm like, all right. You know, there's ladies watching, so I couldn't say no. I had to impress. And so I just start running. And have you ever had that moment where you're terrified and you feel like you're just dragging 1,000 pounds of weight in your legs? Right? You're like, I feel like my legs are just dead weight right now. Why is my body moving, but I can't feel them? I was petrified. I'm like, I'm going to die. It was good life, you know? Long, well-lived. A total of like 17, 18 years, however old I was. And it was good. But I did it. I ran, jumped, cleared the rock face, landed in the water. All was well. Well, my buddy Joe was next. And the reason why I tell you this story is because I still laugh about it, and I still pick on him about this moment. So I'm actually climbing the ladder to come back up the side of the cliff. And my buddy Joe, I hear him. It's kind of like Tarzan sounding, right? He starts running, and he's like screaming at the same time. And he jumps out. And my buddy Joe's 6'4", all right, in high school. He was just a big lug of a guy. And he jumps out. And he started kind of like head first, and then while in the air, I'm watching him, he's like now straight up in the air, and then he just continued to go further back and back. I'm like, what's he doing? This dude, by the time he hit the water, completely backflopped, right? And I'm like, I just witnessed my best friend dying. That's what I thought. I'm like, he's dead. And so he goes under the water and just comes up, and he's just like floating in this creek. I'm like, oh my goodness, he's gone. And he's like, I'm good, just give me a minute, right? He comes over to me, he's like, Todd, we are going home and we are never coming back to this place ever again. right? He told me that day, he's like, Todd, I've never been so scared. I don't know why I jumped, but I did. And thank goodness I am still alive right now, right? We all have these moments where in fear, we can sometimes even do stupid stuff. We all have these fears, these things that cause us to be scared, all right? Now, whatever it is for you, this is what I want us to understand. It's a struggle that we all face, whether it's a fear or whether it's pain. But here's the thing that I want us to understand as we look at Joseph's life, as we see the example that he set. He experienced this pain, he's experienced this fear that ultimately led him to this point of temptation. And this temptation was a massive tipping point for his life. And I think it's good for us to see this example because I think for some of us, our fear, the experiences that we've had in our lives will get us to this point where we're faced in a situation of temptation where, what do I do? And so as we think about kind of this idea or this moment even of temptation that Joseph experienced, tonight what I want us to understand are three things about Joseph. All right, so if you're taking notes, feel free to jot them down. These three things, as we take a look at his life, I think will help you understand kind of how God even met him in the midst of this circumstance or experience that he had. All right, so the first thing I want you to know is this, that Joseph was betrayed. All right, Joseph was betrayed. Some of you may know this story. It's actually a great story, and encourage you to spend some more time reading it. But you can open up your Bibles if you have them, or open up your phones to it. Book of Genesis, first book of the Bible, chapter 37. Chapter 37, we're going to start here in verses 1 through 8, and then we're going to jump ahead to 12 through 17. And this is what I want you to do. Just sit back, relax, listen, follow along if you have it open. I just want you to kind of, just experience the story of Joseph here a little bit. Here's what it says. Genesis chapter 37. It says, this is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the son of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw their father loved him more than the others, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while their sheaves gathered around mine, and it bowed down to it. Verse 8, it says, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Hop down to verse 12. It says in verse 12, now his brothers had gone to graze the father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to them, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. So as you look at this here, all right, let's just get a good picture, a good understanding of what's going on here in Joseph's life. So here's some background. We understand as we read these verses, Joseph, he's a teenager. He's most of your age is sitting in this room. He's a shepherd. So he's about 17. He's a shepherd. We learned that he actually doesn't participate in a lot of the activities that his brothers do, right? He's seeing how the brothers are like living their lives. He's like, I don't want any part of that. And so he kind of did his own thing. But we also see that Joseph would actually report back to their dad, Jacob, reporting what the brothers had been doing. Well, this caused Joseph to become the favorite in the eyes of his dad, Jacob. So much so that Jacob started to kind of give Joseph special gifts, like this multicolored robe of the finest linen. Like this was like a prized possession. And the dad basically looks at Joseph and says, man, you are my favorite. So here you go. This belongs to you. Now, think about this for a second. How many of you have siblings? How many of you have siblings? All right. What if your mom and dad came up to you and says, hey, your brother or sister, they're my favorite, not you. Sorry, right? I'm an only child, so I was the favorite because my parents didn't have a choice. It was just me, all right? And so I got the advantage of being the firstborn, the secondborn, and the lastborn. All right, and so you think about this here, Joseph is getting favored by his dad, and the other brothers are like, yeah, not cool, not gonna happen, right? What is going on? And so what happened is this hatred began to grow towards the siblings to Joseph. So much so, right, we begin reading as we continue on, we see that Joseph goes to his brothers and said, hey guys, I had a dream one time, and basically this dream is showing me that I'm better than you. All right, so yeah, take that for what it's worth. And they're like, really? Okay, so the brothers are going to continue to hate him even more. Well, guys, it gets to the point where the brothers are like, listen, we want him dead. We don't want Joseph around anymore. They got to the place where they hated him so bad that they're like, we're going to kill him. But thankfully, Joseph had one brother, Reuben, who was like, you know what? I don't think we should kill him. Let's just give him a break. Let's just kind of like not worry about him as much. Let's cut him some slack. Well, so instead of killing them, they put him into slavery. All right? They sent him out into slavery. So here, let's put yourself into this situation a second. Joseph, many siblings, hated by them, sent off to slavery. Could you imagine what was going through Joseph's mind in that moment? How was he feeling in that moment? He was betrayed by his own family. All right? Oh, hi, guys. You all right?
No.
No? All right. Let's party here a little bit. As we think about this a second, Joseph, he was terrified. He was scared, right? He literally was just put into slavery, and he was uncertain about his future. He's like, what is happening from this moment on? And as I think about this example of what is being said here by Joseph, the reality is pain, this idea of fear, comes into our lives, right? And we can't run from it. Fear is going to come, and as a result, we're going to experience pain. And it can come in all different ways. And in a way, it's kind of like us being in slavery at times. I'm not talking about a physical slavery like he was. I'm talking about this like emotional slavery, or even a spiritual slavery. We're being held kind of away from really who we're supposed to be or what was good. This emotional situation or experience is getting the best of us. And unfortunately for Joseph, what we find is his life was just kind of falling apart around him. It was crazy. He's being thrown into a place where no one knows him. But this is where we start to see how God kind of meets him where he was. Because what we find is that the presence of God was still with him. Because we see this of how Joseph used this experience and still experienced freedom and still had the confidence to move forward and not allow this instant, this moment of where his family is starting to like turn on him, where his life is being threatened, where he was just put into slavery, this horrible situation, he's not allowing it to get the best of him. Because as we think about this, for Joseph in this moment, he knew the importance of like, man, I could allow this situation to keep me captive. I could allow it to bondage me here. I could allow this, similar to what we experience in kind of our slavery towards this emotion, the sin, or the bondages that we experience. It can get the best of us, and it can destroy us. But the truth is, God wants us to experience freedom from him. He wants us to be able to rely on him so that we don't have to be weighed down by what's going on in our lives. The truth about fear is it kind of shrinks who we are. It crushes who we are, and it begins to allow us to think about things of ourselves that just aren't true. But God met Joseph in this situation. This is where I want to continue to unpack this a little bit more. So we're seeing how Joseph is in the midst of it. He was betrayed. He was also tempted. And this is where it gets really interesting. So he was sent off by his brothers into slavery. He's now in Egypt. And we're seeing this instance where in the moment of his fear, potentially, and the pain that he was experiencing, it led him to a moment where he was being tempted. So let's take a look at Genesis 39, verses 2 and 4. Jump ahead 2 chapters here, chapter 39. So let's learn a little bit more about Joseph. Here's what it says. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. All right. Now the Lord was with Joseph, so he prospered, and he lived in the house of this Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. So let's think about this. Joseph, put into slavery, realized people around him are starting to see this Joseph guy's a pretty good dude, right? He was actually a great administrator. He could take care of things. And so Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials here in Egypt, trusted him so much that he basically made him the head of the household. And we see that God met Joseph in this moment, and he prospered, and he became successful. Jump down to 6, verse 6. It gets juicy here, listen, all right? Verse 6. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. He's a stud, all right? And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me," all right? Okay, now it's getting interesting. Because now we have Potiphar, this Egyptian official, who's married. His wife is now taking interest in Joseph. Verse 8. He refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in his house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care." Check out what verse 9 says. It says, "No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Now then, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. All right, so Joseph, he's a stud. He's a good-looking young guy. He caught the attention of Potiphar's wife. His wife wanted Joseph time and time again. We're seeing this moment of temptation. And I love what was said in verse 9. All right, because we see that this is a healthy fear that Joseph had towards God. It says, no one is greater than this in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Now then, I say this every time, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? In this moment of temptation, this moment of self-control that Joseph was having, he's like, listen, above all else, my mind, my heart is actually focused on God. I have a fear towards him. I do not want to sin against him. And I think it's important that temptation comes to everyone. Every single one of us in this room, we have been tempted in some way, shape, or form. Jesus himself, who was perfect, was tempted. Being tempted, there's nothing wrong with. Being tempted, you have done nothing wrong. It's when we take the step into the temptation, when we stumble and we fall, that's where it gets us. And so Joseph knew this. And what he chose to do was he ran. And guys, this is big with this story. Because for some of us, if you're anything like me, when we're in the moment of temptation, we kind of want to bulk up. We want to fight against that temptation. I'm going to take on, head on, whatever that temptation is so I don't lose to it. And we fight. But this example that we see with Joseph is that he ran. And guys, I think this is a great example because I truly believe when we are faced with areas of struggle, when we are tempted with whatever sin struggle that you and I have, the best thing we can do is turn and run the other way. It says he ran. He left the robe in her hands and ran. This is such a big deal. And so in this moment, I just want you to understand when our fears lead us to this situation or experience in our life where we might even be experiencing pain from it, we open up the door to a weakness. Fear can rip us down at times. In moments where we are tempted, we're more likely to stumble and fall. But what Joseph's setting us up here for is to say, just run from it. But here's what we find out in verses 19 and 20. All right? Potiphar's wife accuses him falsely. So much so that Potiphar then throws Joseph into prison. And so as you think about this for yourself, all right, the fear in our lives, when it controls, it will lead us down this path where it kind of allows sin, it allows us to become weak, and it allows us to become hopeless. And what happens in that moment is exactly this. Satan wants you to be weak. And that's what Satan was doing to Joseph in this moment. He wanted Joseph to sleep with Potiphar's wife. He wanted him to stumble. He wanted him to be thrown into prison. Because what Satan will do is he will accuse you. He will tie you up with struggles with sin. He will cause all this pain where you are left hopeless. And his hope and his desire is for you to turn your back against God. And that is kind of this pattern that we follow. This is what happens in our lives when we allow fear to begin to control. That fear leads to where we fall into temptations and where we allow these areas of what we call sin to get the best of us. But thankfully for Joseph, he sets this example for us that even in the midst of what he's experienced, the betrayal by his family, being thrown into slavery, he didn't allow his fear to get the best of him. He knew that God was with him and that temptation was not going to overtake him because he ran. He didn't stay and fight. And when you and I fully rely on the presence of God in our lives, God gives us this power. He gives us the strength. He gives us the confidence that ultimately fills us with hope that allows us to head into any situation and tackle it and find victory over it. The last thing that I want you to know about Joseph was this, is that he was imprisoned, right? We understand that because as you think about this experience, when you think about this slavery, of him experiencing it physically, he experienced it spiritually, he experienced it emotionally. And so when we know when he was in prison, we have to see that even while he was in prison, looking at chapter 39, 20 through 23, what we find is this. You can read it on your own. For time's sake, I'm just going to continue to move on. What we see here is that God was with him through it all, even in the midst of his trials. So while Joseph was sitting there in prison, I mean, you could imagine what prison looked like. The warden, or the main guard there in the jail, started to have a relationship with Joseph and realized that Joseph was a trustworthy dude. And he actually gave Joseph the opportunity to kind of lead the other prisoners. And so now Joseph has this role where he's in prison, but he's playing a significant leadership role within the jail. And as he's leading other people, we read in chapter 40 where he then helped what they call the cupbearer to go back and regain his position with Pharaoh. And this gave the opportunity for Joseph to get out of prison and go to Pharaoh. And while he was with Pharaoh, he started to kind of reveal and read dreams. This was a gift that Joseph had. God would help give him these visions, these dreams, and he would just share what God was putting on his heart. And so the one dream that he shared with Pharaoh was to warn him of this famine that was coming. And so even in the midst of Joseph being in prison, what we find is that God was with him through it all. And so the last couple of things that I want you to understand, that I have some questions for you to think about. The idea of giving into our fear only pushes us away from God. the more we allow fear to control us, it's going to push us further away from him. The greatest weapon that Satan holds against you, listen to this, is isolation. He wants you to be alone. He wants you to think that nobody cares about you. He wants you to think that it doesn't matter how hard you try, no one really likes you. And so imagine in this moment, Joseph is in prison, probably no other place. The whole purpose of prison is for you to be isolated. But even in the midst of it, he allowed God to work in him and provide him opportunities so that he didn't have the opportunity to give Satan to control him. This is powerful. And so I want you to understand what fights fear is knowing that there is an unconditional love that exists for you. And that love comes from God. And we see this, how God worked and met Joseph in the midst of all of these trials. He never leaves you. He's never going to just leave you out to dry. He's going to be with you. He's going to guide you. And his desire is to continue to bless you through your life. God created Joseph with an incredible purpose. And he's done the same for you. He has given you a purpose. And what's important for you to grasp and understand is that you are living your life understanding the full potential that you have. The potential that God has kind of wired and given to every single one of you. But not reaching God's fullest desire for your life ultimately should be the only thing that you should fear. I love what Joseph says in chapter 50, verse 20. He says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Think about the perspective that Joseph had in that moment. He's like, look, my brothers abandoned me, attempted to kill me, threw me into slavery. I was tempted, I was imprisoned, I went through it all, but listen, I understand what God's doing. And so as the band comes up and gets settled in, here's what I want you to think about, all right? I want you to think about these questions. What is it? What fear? What pain? What experience have you had in your life that is controlling you? What is it that is controlling you? The second thing is this. Is there a temptation in your life that you need to run from instead of fight? Band, come on up, all right? As you think about this question, is there a temptation in your life that you need to run from instead of fight? And the last question is this. How are you going to trust or rely in God in these moments of fear and pain? So as you think about these questions tonight, I want you to remember that above all, God is wanting to meet you in those moments. Don't allow the fear to control you. And if you need to process through and talk about maybe some of these experiences that you've had in your life, right? Know that there is freedom that can be found from those moments. So think about these questions. While the band plays, before you leave tonight, even as you go home, think through them and see how God can meet you in those moments. Jesus, thank you. I'm grateful for the truth of your word. I love that we can press in and kind of understand how you, God, have a greater story. That there is a story that you are just kind of unfolding, Lord. And what happens is we get blinded by what's right in front of us. Because, God, we can't see the big picture, but you know it. And so my heart, my prayer, my desire is for these students, myself included, that we would be able to just trust you. That we would put our trust and fully rely on you, knowing that you have a plan for each one of our lives. So, God, we ask that you lead us. We love you, Lord. We pray this in your name. Amen.